I was informed that he wanted Nicole and I in the movie, and I read the script, and Nick was shooting Portrait of a Lady at the time, and I'd read it there, and he said, please have it, you know, I'll give it to you the day before, or maybe even, he said, you keep it the weekend, then we'll meet, you know, if you want to meet me in a few days. But I just also, I wanted to show to him that I was trustworthy, that he could trust me, that, you know, he could tell me anything, I would never discuss it with anyone. And so I read the script and flew immediately to where he was, to his property, and I landed on his property in this helicopter. And I said, look, I'm sorry about this, but otherwise it's a 6-hour drive, and I've got, you know, my babies are here, and Nick, and I couldn't figure out another way how to get there quickly and then get back. And of course, you know, he'd set up the landing pad, and I remember the helicopter coming in onto his property, and he'd given me the GPS coordinates to give to the pilot, and told me, sent me a diagram of where he wanted me to land the airplane, the helicopter. And I remember just landing in, and there he was, just waiting, just alone in the garden as it came down. And the helicopter came down, and we discussed the helicopter and what kind it was and how many hours that I'd flown in these helicopters. And he walked me around the grounds, and I just remember thinking, this guy's kind of a magical, wonderful guy, you know. And I was so nervous. I remember talking to Sydney and saying, listen, what happens if I don't like a word, or I mean, what's it going to be like? I mean, can I, you know, what do I say to him? I don't want to offend him. And Sydney was thinking, just, you know, he's you know, he's human, you know, you just talk to him. I said, oh yeah, of course, I just talked to him, you know, I just talked to Stanley. We told him right at the beginning, whatever it takes. And the two of us together, you know, you have to say, I'm glad it didn't happen in the first year, you know, years of our marriage. It would have been very difficult to confront those issues, and even though we had a very strong bond, but you know, we're still, it would have been, you know, it would have been very difficult for us to do that. I don't know what would have happened. I'm not saying that our marriage would have broken up, but I'm just saying it would have been much more difficult. And even there were times where it was very difficult during the making of the movie. Times where, you know, the characters are at odds, and all of these raw, you know, emotions are there, and you can't, you know, when you're in the middle of a scene, you know, especially the way Stanley's working, the way I work, you don't just fire it off and go, okay, honey, what do you think? You know, you're respectful and disciplined about it, but it does invade your life. It is there. It is pervasive. Especially, I worked every single day, except for only a few days on the movie, and there I was with Stanley, and it was me and Stanley in the trailer, and me and Stanley, you know, and Nick, a lot of the times, and it was there, and you know, I think he knew that what I was going through. At some point when we were going along, and I just felt, you know, you feel frustrated at times playing a character like that for so long, and finding, because every scene, you know, Stanley would say, look, we got to earn every scene with this character, every single moment with this character. And he knew that, you know, in times when I just get frustrated with myself, and that at times that we couldn't get it, you know what I mean? And it was just like, you know, fuck. It just, or you just know when you don't have that fire burning that day, or if I was tired, it just, you know, and I bring it upon myself, you know, because I demand a lot of myself. And I know there are a lot of people in my life that are saying, when are you coming back? What do you know, because I've got a company that I had, and when are you coming back? And I remember talking to Stanley, and I said, Stanley, look, I don't care how long it takes, but I have to know, are we going to finish in 6 months? You know, this is after shooting for 6 months. Am I going to finish, but can I set meetings and have people, because people were waiting, and writers were waiting, and people that I was paying, because I said, Stanley, I don't care. Tell me it's going to be 2 years, Stanley. And he'd say, oh, Tom, don't be ridiculous. ridiculous. I mean, if it takes that long, you know, I mean, then what do, you know, everything they say about us is true, you know. And I would laugh, and you know, and I say, okay, all right, Stanley. The last day of shooting, a day that that I, you know, had both looked forward to and dreaded. You know, looked forward to because I just, you know, there was enough with Dr. Bill in some ways, you know, and dreaded because I didn't want the experience with Stanley to end. And I remember saying, hey, you know, I was walking out and I gave him a kiss and a hug, and I said, you know, I love you, Stanley, you know that. And he turned to me, and he was just right there, and it was just a quiet moment. It was late at night, and he said, you know, I love you too. And he said, thank you, and I said, thank you. And it was much like the moment of you know, of the last time we spoke. Now, I shared 3 years of my life with this man, and
it must have been an unbelievable thing to have heard that he died so soon after the film had been finished. What was that to your immediate reaction?
My immediate reaction was one of absolute shock. And disbelief. And even when I went to the funeral and going to the funeral, I was not in a good way, and I was very concerned about Nick and very concerned about Christian and his family, and concerned about the movie, you know, because I know what it meant to him and what it meant to me, and my wife, my co-star, my love, and I still even went to the funeral thinking, you know, somewhere it was, you know, I mean, it was ridiculous, because somewhere still inside I thought, and Nick and I were taught, that it's not true. Somewhere deep inside I wanted to believe this is not true, that I'm going to go and I will show up at the house and he will be there. It wasn't, you know, it was illogical, and it wasn't something that I actually, but somewhere there was a part of me that went there, and not until we went into the room where we'd have dinner with Christian and we drank, you know, when Nick and I were first there, in the fireplace, and there was Stanley and Christian, you know, and and there was the coffin, and it just, you know, it just was absolutely absurd.
Nicole, how was the contact first made? Did it come through Sidney Pollack and Tom to you for the offer from Stanley to do Eyes Wide Shut?
He actually sent me the script. He was having a whole conversation through fax with Tom, which I wasn't that aware of, you know. I mean, I knew that Kubrick was talking to him and stuff, but I wasn't. They'd been faxing each other for well over a year. And I was in the middle of doing Portrait of a Lady, actually finishing it, so I was in London. And I got this call saying Stanley wants to send you. It was Stanley's assistant saying he wants to send a script. Where shall we send it? And there's a letter. And I was stunned. And they said, and you've got to make sure that you'll be at the house at this particular time to receive it and everything. And I said, okay. And he sent me this letter, which I've kept, which I've subsequently got filed, that said, I'd love you to play Alice Harford. I think you'd be perfect in the role. Please read it. Make sure you're sitting down when you read it. You're not distracted. You're rested. And call me and tell me what you think. And that was basically what happened.
Had Tom read it at that point or not? It came to you rather than to Tom?
No, it came to him as well. He got a copy of the script as well. So, and then I heard from my agent that Stanley had been calling for about 9 months for different tapes of my work and had been seeing things, and so obviously I had no idea, and my agent hadn't told me because it wasn't a job offer or anything. It was just sort of interest, I think. And that's how that's how it evolved.
Did you make the private journey to St Albans to meet and talk to him then?
Yes.
What was your first impression of him when you met him?
I remember thinking, well, he's sort of scruffy, and he was wearing a jacket, and he had the most extraordinary eyes you've ever seen on a human being. I think would be the perfect way, and his daughter has those eyes too, but they're hooded eyes. And they look at you and they have this quite mischievous quality, and yet they're very they have a great sense of having lived.
And
his eyes.
Did you get the feeling that he was seeing things in you that other people hadn't seen?
No, I was just terrified that he was going to fire me. I was thought he was going to take one look at me and say, well, oh gosh, what was I thinking? This woman is not right for the role. And say, look, we've got to part ways. I had that fear for about the first month of knowing him, because I was very nervous around him, partly because I was so in awe of him, and then just because I have in the film very big monologues, 2 very big monologues that I thought were going to be very, very difficult, and I thought if he ever sees me do them, he's not going to want me in the film. So, so there's my insecurities as an actor. But over the course of time, I became so confident with him. I mean, he just gave me such confidence as an actor, and really allowed me such freedom as an actor. He would say, okay, you've done a few takes, now you can just do what you want to do. And I'd heard all these stories about him being incredibly controlling and not wanting this and not wanting that. And at certain times he was very controlling. At other times he was, please just, and particularly with the monologues, is when he allowed me just to really just get lost in Alice. And I think that's what happened. I mean, over the course of the 1.5 years, I just, became that woman.
You became her. I mean,
in a weird way. I mean, I know that sounds ridiculous, because obviously I am who I am, but as an actor you set up, there's reality and there's pretend, and those lines get crossed, and it happens when you're working with a director that allows that to happen. And it's a very exciting thing to happen. It's a very dangerous thing to happen as well. And when it does happen, I think that's when the work becomes so much more than just making a film.
You see, this must be a lifetime experience. You probably will never make a film under these circumstances again, like this, will you?
No.
And it's probably still very fresh in your mind. You probably need some years to recall what it was actually like. What I'd like to hear from you, though, is I'm not interested in, the stories about 50 takes. I understand why he went to 50 takes.
And sometimes didn't.
What
So it was very unpredictable. It was always unpredictable.
What I'd like to know from you, though, is what you were feeling as a person and as an actor as he took you beyond what anybody would say would be an ordinary number of attempts at a particular piece of performance.
I think you go through all sorts of emotions. I mean, Stanley always was waiting for something to happen, and he wasn't as interested in naturalistic acting as he was in something that, for whatever reason, surprised him or piqued his interest. That's when he would go, okay, now we're onto something. And he was always interested in exploring things, that there was no right and wrong in relation to making a film, a performance. It wasn't about, well, this is the right way to do it and this is the wrong way to do it. It was about exploring all facets of it so that then he could go into the editing room and edit it. That's what I perceive it as. So as an actor, you as long as you relaxed into the situation and said, okay, I'm going to go with this, then it was the most wonderful experience, because you didn't ever walk away from the set feeling, I didn't get it. Oh, if only he'd let me have one more, maybe we would have discovered something. He made sure that he discovered everything there was to discover in the material.
Did you find yourself surprising yourself with new things?
It's by doing a lot of takes, and also by being so close to him and to Tom, I was constantly surprising myself, but I was very relaxed. So a lot of the time when the cameras were on, I wasn't even aware. The awareness of all the other things, like people standing around and booms and cameras and stuff, was to the point where I wouldn't even notice it. I wouldn't even think about it, which is a really difficult situation to get into. When you do it on a film for a small amount of time, it requires extraordinary concentration, and a lot of the time you don't achieve it because you're still aware, and you always have a feeling of, I wish I'd just been able to try something else. Whereas with Stanley, you get to the stage where you don't notice any of it. Partly you're tired, which is actually a very good thing sometimes when you're acting, because it means that you're not trying to produce emotions or trying to be this or thinking this is how it should be. It just happens and just sort of comes out of you. It's very hard to explain. It's something that only a small number of people who have worked with Stanley understand, but it's almost like a club, because when you meet, and it's editors, it's production designers, it's DP, it's whoever has worked with him and experienced his intensity and his passion for filmmaking. They're the only people that truly understand it, and other actors.
Can I ask you about a couple of scenes, because our time's limited? The scene where things start to go wrong between you and your husband in the film is after you smoke pot, and it's Christiana has spoken to me a lot about this, and her interpretation is that this careless talk threatens the marriage. It's actually, the pot has taken you the wrong way. It could have taken you one way, sexy and happy. It took you the other way.
Well, that's what I think's so honest about that, is that Bill thinks, okay, we're going to have sex now. He's all settling in for the night, and he says one thing. It happens to be the wrong thing, and it triggers a number of reactions from me, which is so real. I mean, this happens to all of us in our relationships, or in our marriages at different times, where and you see Bill sort of reeling from it. I think it's a very funny scene. I love Stanley's humor, and it really comes across in that scene, and then he takes it into that dangerous territory of where I am just spewing things, saying things that I have held back for so long, that just sort of happened to come out at this particular time on this particular night. And I find that fascinating, but so real.
Do you think that character you were playing had the self-awareness to know that she was threatening everything?
No way. No, but I think subconsciously she wanted something more from her husband. She loves him. She still loves him. She wants to be with him, but she's searching for something more. We debated this scene a lot, Stanley and I, and he would say to me, Nicole, you should be a lawyer, because I would debate each issue of the scene and each issue of Alice's arguments. And sometimes I'd find flaws in her argument, and I would say, but hold on, no, we've got to fix this because I wanted to be right, you know? And he said, the key thing here is, Nicole, you're stoned. There is no rational, it's not even a rational argument. You're not standing up in the court of law and having to be, everything is perfect. He said, when people argue, they say the most ridiculous things. At other times, they say the most profound things. At times, they're right on course with their line of argument, and other times they veer off and sound ridiculous. And that's what I love about the argument, is that it is completely irrational at times. And that's what makes it funny as well. And then when my favourite moment is when I would just start to laugh. I just loved doing that, where I just break down laughing, which then segues into this whole story about this man that I fantasized about.
There are two acting moments I must ask you about. One is where you're asleep and you're laughing. I mean, they're both extraordinary acting moments. I'd like you to help us understand how you would, apart from your natural talent, achieved this with Stanley's help. That laughter when you're asleep seemed to be an absolutely genuine laugh of pleasure, which is interrupted and then becomes a nightmare. What was it that you'd agreed that you were laughing at that moment?
I mean, a lot of stuff that Stanley didn't like you talking about, you know, the things. It was the imagery of the dream. It was being lost completely in the imagery of the dream. And he was very particular about the type of laugh. And I remember we did quite a lot of takes just on the beginning. He would cut it early if he didn't feel that it was the perfect sound that he wanted to hear at that time.
It was a kind of out of controlled
yeah, it's
laugh.
a weird laugh. I know. I find it quite weird when I watch it, because I've only seen the movie twice to date, but I find it quite disturbing, and I find the whole film like that. It's very hard for me to sit down and watch it.
After he says, "I'll tell you everything," there's a cut to you. You've been crying for hours. You're smoking. How did you achieve that?
I cried for hours.
I've never seen a transformation like that, and so brilliantly held.
Yeah, I mean, Stanley, I mean, that was the thing, time. We didn't have to worry about time. So to prepare for that, I just went and cried. When I talked to Stanley, and my face I look at that and I go, oh my gosh, I look so ravaged. But I love that I look ravaged, because, you know, a lot of times you're kind of rushing and you can't quite, we don't have time, and come on, just hurry up. He gave me the time.
What was your...
And I just...
I'm sorry to interrupt you, because we're under a great time pressure, and I'd love to talk to you for half an hour. It'd be fascinating. What was your immediate reaction when you heard that he died?
Shock. And I didn't believe it. And I didn't want to believe it, because it just seemed wrong. Didn't seem like the right time. He seemed to have too many other things to do and say. And it's still very, sorry. Oh.
I'll move from that just for a second. You deliberately spent a lot of... I'm sorry to bring that on
No,
you.
it's all right.
You spent a lot of time with him deliberately,
Yeah.
didn't you?
Yeah.
Do you want a hanky?
It's fine.
And you learnt a lot. And I have the feeling that he became a sort of a father figure for you professionally speaking, and probably in a sense personally as well. What did you learn from him? What could you pass on to what that time that you spent with him now must seem enormously valuable to you? What did it mean to you that time?
I think it changed the way I view films, the way I view filmmaking. It gave me a belief in the purity of filmmaking, in the art form of making a film, and that however long it takes, whatever you have to go through, you're making a film, and it's extraordinary and wonderful. And a lot of the times now, I think, people view films in a very business way. We have a product, we've got to get it out for summer, we've got to make the film, it's got to be this, it's got to be that. And filmmaking isn't that. It's about getting lost in that world, and it's exquisite when it happens.
What you're saying actually is that what I've always believed, and most of us have, that film is an art at its highest level.
Yeah, and that a lot of the times now you can really question that, and particularly as an actor you can be corrupted, I think, even as a director. But it's, I mean, Stanley Kubrick was someone that dedicated his life to making films, and he believed in that art form in such a pure way, and he lived films, he loved films. And a lot of the time we can say, oh, that's pretentious, or oh, well, you know, there's so many other more important things in the world. And yes, there is. But the great storytellers of our past and are also, and of now, are so important to our future. And I think Stanley gave me a belief in that again. He was one of the great storytellers of all time, and he used film as his medium to do that, and it was beautiful.
When we first met, which was in 1980, when he was just finishing the construction of his sets for The Shining, and we met for the first time, we talked a lot about movies, and I was about to make Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I was actually moving on to his stages. When he finished, I was moving in. And of course, when his stage burnt down, it changed my schedule. We had to go to France first to start shooting, to give Stanley a chance to finish Strike and let us build the Well of the Souls, where the Overlook main hotel, lobby was, the main room where Jack Nicholson did the infamous typing. When it was all over and the movie was done, I saw Stanley again and went to his house for dinner in London and St. Albans, and he asked me he said, "How did you like my movie?" And I had only seen it once, and I didn't love Shining the first time I saw it. I have since seen Shining 25 times, one of my favorite pictures. Kubrick films tend to grow on you. You have to see them more than once, but the wild thing is, I defy you to name me one Kubrick film that you can turn off once you start it. It's impossible. He's got this fail-safe button or something. It's impossible to turn off a Kubrick film. But I didn't like it the first time I saw it. And I was telling him all the things I liked about it, and he saw right through me. And he said, "Well, Stephen, obviously you didn't like my picture very much." And I said, "Well, there's a lot of things I loved about it." He says, "Yeah, but there's a lot of things you didn't, probably more you didn't than you didn't. So tell me what you didn't like about it." And I said, "Well, the thing that I thought Jack Nicholson, who is a great actor, and I thought it was a great performance, but it was almost a great kabuki performance. It was almost like kabuki theater." He said, "You mean you think Jack went over the top?" And I said, "Yeah, I kind of did." And he said, "Okay, quickly, without thinking, who are your top favorite actors of all time?" And I don't want you to think, just name off some names. So I quickly, went Spencer Tracy, Henry Fonda, Jimmy Stewart, Cary Grant, Clark Gable. He said, "Stop." He stopped me. He said, "Okay, where was James Cagney on that list?" And I didn't have it. I thought, well, he's up there high. He said, but he's not in the top 5. He said, "You don't consider James Cagney one of the 5 best actors around." You see, I do. This is why Jack Nicholson's performance is a great one. Every phone conversation was just an inspiration for me personally. Stanley liked information. I supplied him with a lot of information. Sometimes information he asked me for, other information I volunteered. But in getting to know him, I understood what the dynamic of the relationship was. That Stanley would give me advice. He'd collaborate with me. I'd tell him a story I was interested in directing as a movie, and he'd ask me all the tough questions. What do you find interesting about that story? Why do you want to make that picture? Gee, that sounds kind of boring to me. How can you make that interesting? I mean, he was challenging me constantly. He gave me as much, if not more, than I feel I ever could possibly give him. First, he gave me all his movies, and then he gave me his friendship, which meant he gave me his time. And there's no greater gift a person can give to another person. When you look at all of his films, even though they all have one thing in common, for me anyway, the craft is impeccable. Every film he's ever made, the craft is impeccable. The lighting, the dolly shots, the crane moves, the zoom-ins on Barry Lyndon, the framing, the lighting, the hot windows as backlight. You know, there's the compositions. I mean, the exact compositions. You had to hit your mark precisely to please Stanley so he'd get his painting, the painting he was putting on canvas for you to appreciate. It had to be perfect. His choice of lenses, his Steadicam work in latter year films, impeccable, the best in history. Nobody could shoot a movie better than Stanley Kubrick in history. That was impeccable, but the way he told stories was sometimes antithetical to the way we are accustomed to receiving stories. And I think sometimes Stanley just did that because he didn't want to be like everybody else, and he had a very specific way of telling a story. It's not that he wanted to show off, I'm so different than you, but he said, why does every story have to be told the same way? He would tell me the last couple of years of his life, and we were talking about the form, he kept saying, I want to change the form. I want to make a movie that changes the form. And I said, well, didn't you do that with 2001? He said, just a little bit, but not enough. I really want to change the form. So he kept looking for different ways to tell stories. Well, I think the first thing that makes Stanley Kubrick so special was he was a chameleon. He never made the same picture twice. Every single picture is a different genre, a different period, a different story, a different risk. The only thing that bonded all of his films was the incredible virtuoso that he was with craft and with editing and with performance and with camera placement, with composition. But every single story was different. And every single story somehow was so mysterious in the way the story was told. So kept you guessing, how's this going to turn out? What's going to happen next? I can't even imagine. And all his films are so filled with hairpin turns and story surprises and character surprises that you must see his films more than once because you yearn for those same surprises. And the genius of Stanley is you can look at a movie of his 15 times, and even though you know it's right around the corner, you'll still give it up, and you'll be surprised all over again. And I don't know anybody else who possesses that kind of magic. The thing that I returned to again and again in my mind was the film that I elected to show my friends on the Sunday Stanley died, the Sunday America time Stanley died, when I got the news. And some people came over to the house that night that they were scheduled to come over for dinner anyway. And we talked the whole night about Stanley. And I wanted to show all of them a scene from a movie that for me represented how deep Stanley's heart was and how much he could love and how much he could show emotion, because he had been so often criticized for not being an emotional director. I thought he was a very emotional director. And so I put on the last scene from Paths of Glory, where Christiana, who he then married, who plays the German captive girl, stands up in front of all the French soldiers and sings that song and brings down the house in tears. And we were all crying. And as the soldiers were crying, we were crying watching just the last scene. Didn't show them the whole picture. And that isolated last scene so hit a chord with everyone in the room. And 2 people that night had never seen Paths of Glory, but were still totally affected by that sequence. And that to me represented who Stanley was as a human being.